Okay, let's unpack this. It's kind of stunning when you think about it. We've spent years building this sanctions regime aiming to, you know, cut off Russia's military supply lines.
Yeah.
And yet, their newest missiles, their drones attacking Ukraine, they're packed, just stuffed with microchips designed right here in the US, the UK, Western Europe. This isn't just some minor leak. It feels like a fundamental failure of the whole system.
It really is. It's a systemic failure, one the West has, frankly, struggled to acknowledge for years. But the evidence now, it's just undeniable and quite shocking. Ukrainian President Zelensky laid out the numbers recently. It puts the sheer scale of this into perspective. We're talking nearly 100,688 foreign-made parts found just in Russian drones since the invasion started.
Wow, over 100,000.
Hmm.
Just in drones. Let that number sink in for a sec.
Yeah.
It's not just a couple of smuggled shipments. That points to an industrial-scale pipeline, right?
Exactly. And it's not limited to the cheaper attack drones either. You see about 1,500 foreign parts inside their Iskander ballistic missiles, around 405 in the Kleber cruise missiles, and almost 200 components even in the Kinsal hypersonic missiles.
So these aren't trivial parts. They're the core components.
Absolutely. They're the microelectronics, the bits that handle guidance, navigation, flight control, the nervous system. And they're coming from companies in coalition countries, US, UK, Germany, Switzerland, Japan. So the mission for us today really is to face this reality. We need to look past the endless debates about tweaking sanctions. That's clearly not enough. We need to ask, what decisive offensive actions can Ukraine take now? How can they hit Russia's military and logistical pillars hard enough to make a difference? And just as importantly, what does the West need to do to actually stop fueling this fire? So we're going deep into a potential strategic blueprint, one designed to break this incredibly costly stalemate.
Right. And when we talk about the technical failure of sanctions, the heart of the problem seems to be these omni-use components. Is that right?
That's it, precisely. Our sanctions lists, they tend to focus on very specific military-grade technology, things that are maybe radiation-hardened, built to exacting military specs. But what Russia's is actually using, overwhelmingly, is commercial, off-the-shelf stuff.
Like what exactly?
Microprocessors, voltage regulators, microchips, transistors, the kind of components you'd find in your car, or, believe it or not, your washing machine, your home air conditioning system.
Okay, so stuff that's everywhere.
Exactly. And that's the structural vulnerability. The regulations focus on the high-end, specialized exports, but they completely miss these everyday civilian components. Our analysis, looking at drones like the Shahid, the Lancet, the Orlan 10, it shows a staggering 69% of the foreign parts we could analyze came from U.S.-owned companies.
69% from U.S. firms.
Yes. Companies like Intel, Analog Devices, Texas Instruments. And because these chips are just readily available, you can buy them on open marketplaces like AliExpress or Alibaba. The whole formal control system gets bypassed. Availability just trumps enforcement.
Which makes the evasion networks incredibly effective, if you can't control the product itself.
Then the network kicks in. Russia gets something like 98%, almost all of these critical components through third countries. They use complex global supply chains, layers of shell companies. It makes tracking the final destination almost impossible.
It makes any real control seem, well, almost like a pretense.
It does, and you see how the geopolitical landscape enables this. Certain countries are exploiting the gaps for profit. China is the biggest channel, no question. About 67% of critical component deliveries since the invasion started came via China, another 17% through Hong Kong.
So that's, what, 84% combined?
Roughly, yeah. But then you also have Turkey and the UAE acting as major transit hubs, about 5% and 2% respectively. In places like the UAE, you've literally seen a sort of cottage industry spring up, traders specifically sourcing electronics for Russia. These countries are, you could say, hedging their bets. They're profiting from the conflict, showing a real lack of commitment to the West's stated goals.
What I find interesting, though, is Russia's adaptability. They're not just using cheap parts. They're engineering around the limitations.
Right.
They can't get the top-tier military chips easily, so they make do with consumer grade. How does that work? Is it just like adding some extra padding?
It's much more sophisticated than that, actually. It's not just gluing on insulation, though that might be part of it sometimes. It involves real engineering resilience. They might modify cooling systems because consumer chips aren't built for harsh military environments. They might use multiple lower-grade chips working in parallel to get the performance they need. They build in redundancy. Essentially, they substitute the reliability of military-grade parts with the sheer availability of consumer tech, plus some clever design workarounds.
And that adaptation is directly fueled by our leaky supply chains. It makes their war machine less dependent on the stuff we can control and more reliant on the everyday tech we don't control.
Precisely. Which leads us to the strategic pivot. If sanctions aren't choking off the supply, and Russia is adapting.
Then the strategy has to shift. If we can't stop the components going in, maybe Ukraine needs to be better equipped to destroy what those components build and enable. Moving beyond defense towards proactive, maybe even uncompromising offense to really raise the cost for Russia.
Yes, shifting from defense to offense. Our sources have identified a list 8 high-value targets, militarily plausible targets. The thinking is, hitting these decisively could fundamentally change the Kremlin's cost-benefit analysis. It could seriously degrade their ability to wage this war. Let's start with logistics. The choke points. Targets designed to stop the flow of war materials.
Okay, target A, the Volga-Don Canal. It's a 63-mile canal in southern Russia. Why is that so critical?
Well, it's a major bottleneck, both militarily and geopolitically. It's how Russia moves warships between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, reinforcing the Black Sea Fleet. And crucially, it's reported to be a key transit route for missiles and other gear supplied by Iran's IRGC. It connects major logistical networks.
So hitting the canal itself.
Not necessarily the whole canal. The vulnerability lies in the locks. There are 13 of them, but locks 8 and 9 are apparently the weak points. They're at the highest point, the summit, and rely on pumping systems to keep the water levels right. If you damage those specific locks, you don't just stop ships passing through, you could potentially disrupt the whole hydraulic balance of that section. That would be a huge blow to Russia's naval flexibility and its supply line from Iran.
Okay, sticking with logistics but moving inside Russia. Target E is about hitting key rail bridges in the Western Military District. We know the railways are vital, moving maybe 20,000 to 30,000 tons of ammo and fuel daily. Hitting moving trains seems hard.
Very hard and inefficient. But the bridges, the railway bridges, the electrical transformers, the traction substations that power the electric lines, those are static targets. They're easier to hit, and critically, they are much, much harder and slower for Russia's railway troops to repair than just replacing a damaged section of track. So, the idea isn't one magic bullet strike. It's a sustained campaign, targeting multiple bridges and substations simultaneously or in quick succession. That could create cascading bottlenecks across the whole rail network. You effectively starve the front lines, less ammo, less fuel, fewer reinforcements, without needing pinpoint accuracy on every single train.
Right, creating systemic disruption. Now let's look at production and external support. If we can't stop the components, can we stop what they're used for? Target B. The joint Russo-Iranian Shahed drone plant in Tatarstan, that's deep inside Russia, 900 miles from Ukraine. It's reportedly making huge numbers of drones.
Huge numbers, up to 190 Shahed-type drones, rebranded as Juran drones by Russia, possibly per day. Projections suggest they could churn out maybe 2,000 by the end of 2025. That volume just overwhelms air defenses. Now, hitting the main plant directly might be tough, given the distance and defenses.
So what's the vulnerability?
Likely the supporting infrastructure, specifically the power supply. It probably relies on a major regional plant, like the Nizhnekansk thermal power plant. If you can disrupt the power grid feeding that facility, you halt mass production, even if the factory buildings are untouched. It shifts the dynamic from constantly trying to shoot down incoming drones to actually degrading their ability to produce them in the first place.
Makes sense. Then there's the big external supporter, China. Target C focuses on severing that support. Trade between Russia and China is massive, over $240 billion a year. And you said 90% of the overland trade goes by rail, mostly through 2 main crossings.
That's right. Vanzuliza-Baikalsk and Suifin-Hippograniki. That's where the bulk of the dual-use electronics and semiconductors likely flow. But this is obviously geopolitically sensitive. You can't just, strike the border crossing itself. The diplomatic fallout would be enormous.
So what's the approach?
The idea is to target vulnerable infrastructure nodes, key bridges, maybe critical rail yards, but within a certain radius, say 100 miles, on the Russian side of the border. You degrade their capacity to move goods from the border deeper into Russia, slowing down that flow of technology without creating a direct border incident with China. It's about strategic degradation.
Okay, now for maybe the most talked about strategic objective, Crimea. Target D is about denying Russia access. Crimea is absolutely central to Russia's operations in southern Ukraine, the Kerch Bridge. It's been hit 3 times, famously, but it's still standing, still usable. Partial damage isn't cutting it anymore.
No, the assessment is it requires a decisive blow. something that renders it structurally unsound, truly impassable for heavy military traffic for a long time. Our sources specifically mention the German Taurus missile as potentially the right tool for this job.
Why Taurus specifically?
Because of its features. It apparently has smart fuse technology, allowing it to penetrate defenses and detonate precisely where needed, and a very powerful warhead designed for hardened targets like bridge supports. The claim is it's the ideal weapon to achieve that permanent incapacitation of the Kerch Bridge. Combine that with taking out the 3 isthmus bridges connecting Crimea to the mainland, Konar, Sivash, and Henichesk, and you effectively isolate the peninsula militarily. Severing Russia's ability to easily resupply or reinforce from Crimea, that would be arguably the single biggest strategic blow Ukraine could land in the south.
A game changer, potentially. Finally, the list includes targets designed to broaden the conflict for Russia, stretch their resources then. Targets F, G, and H.
Right. First, Target F, the new Russian naval base they're building in Abkhazia, in occupied Georgia. They're moving parts of the Black Sea Fleet there because Ukrainian strikes have made Sevastopol too dangerous. But the Abkhazia base is still under construction, reportedly quite exposed, minimal air defenses. Hitting it now disrupts that naval diversification plan and sends a political message, too.
Then, Target G, Transnistria, that strip of Moldova occupied by Russia. Only about 1,500 Russian troops there.
Yes, and they're effectively cut off, surrounded by Ukraine and Moldova. They can't be easily reinforced, and they're using old equipment. Taking action there could give Ukraine significant strategic leverage, relieve pressure near Odessa, and be a major political win.
And lastly, Target H. This one seems ambitious.
Yeah.
Hitting Russia's Pacific Fleet bases. Like Vladivostok, that's thousands of miles away.
It is ambitious, and it wouldn't be easy. The suggestion involved covert methods, perhaps something like containerized seaborne drones launched from commercial vessels. The goal isn't necessarily sinking the Pacific Fleet. It's about forcing Russia to react, to suddenly worry about force protection on a global scale, diverting high-value assets, attention, and resources far, far away from Ukraine. It's about imposing a global cost, making them defend everywhere, stretching their military capabilities to the breaking point.
Okay, so stepping back, what does this all really mean? It feels like we're highlighting a fundamental contradiction. On one hand, Western policy seems stuck with these porous sanctions, inadvertently allowing dual-use tech to flow. On the other, there's this growing argument for decisive, deep strikes by Ukraine to actually raise the cost for Russia and its key allies, like Iran and maybe indirectly China.
That's the core tension, exactly. The conflict is being sustained structurally. It's sustained by the very ubiquity of the technology we design and produce, the omni-use components, and it's sustained by geopolitical fragmentation, where third countries can profit by helping Russia bypass controls. The current path, the sort of partial commitment sanctions with massive loopholes, providing some aid but perhaps holding back the most decisive long-range weapons, it seems to guarantee a perpetual, grinding, incredibly costly stalemate.
So the argument is we need a more uncompromising approach.
It seems that way. Either find a way to genuinely seal off every technological loophole, which politically and practically looks almost impossible right now, or enable Ukraine to decisively strike these strategic weaknesses, the logistics, the production hubs, the access routes, the global vulnerabilities that we've talked about. Anything less seems like prolonging the agony.
Which leaves us with a really challenging final thought, something for everyone listening to consider. Given that the critical components Russia needs most are often Western-designed, commercially available parts, should those nations, maybe even allies, who consistently fail to enforce export controls or who actively facilitate the trade, should they be considered, in effect, tacit partners in this aggression? Does this reality force a much harder, more honest look at who truly stands where in this global conflict and what our own supply chains are enabling?